An HTML table is a way of arranging data, text, images, forms, links, controls, even other tables, into columns and rows of cells. Tables are described using the table element with appropriate content, that is, elements that describe rows, columns, cells, and more. A table may have a caption provided by the caption element. Here are some examples of tables. Here's a classic kind of table. And this table demonstrates using images. And you can even use tables to draw graphs. We'll discuss all this and more in this lesson. In a table, each cell in a column has similar content to other cells in the same column. Think, each column represents some characteristic of an item. An item could be an item in inventory, a person, a group, a country, an experiment, and so on. All the cells in a specific row, then, usually represent all the characteristics of a particular item. We start by exploring the basic structure. The table element holds the whole table. The caption element gives a title to the whole table. TR elements, one per row, composed of TH and TD elements, representing cells in the table. In a later lesson, we'll look at richer possibilities. The table element, define an HTML table, includes all the elements and sub-elements that make up a table. The syntax, start tag, table, possibly with some attributes, and then the table content and the end tag. The start tag and end tag are both required. The table content is an optional caption element followed by one TR element for each row, and each TR element contains some number of TH and TD elements. Useful attributes for table: ID, class, style, title as usual. However, there is one style property that is unique to table. Border collapse, and its options are collapse, separate, and inherit. We'll discuss this later. Possibly useful events? None. Usually this is done at the cell level. The caption element. Provide a caption for the whole table. A table does not need to have a caption, but if there is a caption, it must be the first element under the table element, and there can be only one caption element in a table. Syntax, start tag, caption, possibly with some attributes, and then text, and the end tag. Start tag is required. Now the end tag can be omitted in some cases, but it's simpler to always code it in. I usually just write one line, but the standard shows an example that is several lines long and describes how to understand the content of the table. Not a bad idea. Technically, the caption can include some other elements, such as image elements or even a P element, but keep it simple. Useful attributes for caption: again, ID, class, style, title. However, there is one style property that is unique to caption. Caption side with possible values top or bottom or inherit. The meaning should be pretty clear. Possibly useful events? None. Again, usually process this at the cell level. The TR element. Purpose is to define a row. Again, each row generally represents a particular item, with the details being held in the TH and TD elements in the row. The syntax is a start tag, TR, possibly some attributes, and the content, which is a string of cells, and the end tag. Start tag is required. End tag can be omitted in some cases, but it's simpler to always code it. Useful attributes for TR: ID, class, style, and title, as usual. And possibly useful against, again, probably none. We usually process events at the cell level, if at all. We'll formally introduce TH and TD, then we'll walk through some examples to make this all more concrete. So the TH element, its purpose is to provide a title cell for a row or a column. A TH cell is pretty much like a TD cell. Its intent is to label a row or column. If it labels a row, each row should have a similar first TH element. If it labels a column, each column should have a similar TH element at the top. The H, by the way, is for heading. The idea is that although TH and TD cells are pretty much the same, you might want to set different style attributes for TH versus TD cells. Syntax, start tag, TH, possibly some attributes, and then content of text or image. Start tag is required, and the end tag can be omitted in some cases, but simpler to always code it. Although the content is typically text, it could be an image element or one of a few other kinds of elements. For now, we'll stick to text or image elements. Useful attributes for TH, ID, class, style, title, as in previous elements. There are a few attributes unique here, and these are call span, row span, headers, scope, and ABBR, and we'll talk about those in a later lesson. Possibly useful events, on click, on double click, on change. The TD element defines a cell. Here, the D in TD represents data, so the content of a TD element is the content, the data, in a cell. The syntax, start tag, TD, possibly some attributes. The content, again, is text or image, and the end tag. Start tag is required. The end tag can be omitted in some cases, but it's simpler to always code it. Although the content is typically text, it could be an image element or one of a few other kinds of elements, but for now we'll stick to text or image elements. Useful attributes for TD, ID, class, style, and title as before, and then call span, row span, and headers are new attributes that apply to TD, and we'll discuss those in the next lesson. Possibly useful events, on click, on double click, on change. Let's look at building some tables. I have some examples to see how all the pieces fit together. First, we're going to start with a very basic table just to show some structure. So I'm going to develop a table one step at a time. Here we look at the body of an HTML page. Starts with an H1. Here we develop tables a step at a time. And then a paragraph for spacing and another paragraph, step 1, table with caption and filler cells and some more spacing. Now here's our table. Notice I've got a caption, and then I've got 2 rows, and each row has 3 cells. Generally speaking, you want the same number of cells in each row. And this just says row 1, cell 1, row 1, cell 2, and so on. And there's the end of table and the end of the body. And it shows this way. Well, it's not very readable. We need to provide some separation between cells. This cries out for some style settings. We can provide separation by specifying margin, padding, or border. Let's try border. Note, rows and columns, row groups and column groups cannot have borders. You specify border styles at the TH and or TD level. Our first try at using border is to add a style element with a simple border property for TD elements, like this. So TD border, solid 2-pixel black, and it displays this way. Now, there is a style property unique to tables, border collapse, and this property takes a value of either collapse or separate. Separate is the default, and it produces the result we've been getting. Collapse combines adjacent borders. So if we try adding this in style, table, border collapse, collapse, we get this result. At this point, choosing one over the other is simply a matter of personal preference. Notice the data in the cells seems a little cramped. Well, cell width and height are calculated by your browser, but you can override this by adding amper and BSP semicolon characters, non-breaking space characters, at the front and or back of cell text, or adding a width style property at the cell level, or later on height and other options. Basically, your browser calculates the width and height of a cell by examining the content of the cell and allowing the minimum value that can hold all cell content in each column and row. Let's make a slight change to our table by designating the first cell in each row to be a header, that is, a TH element. And so you'll notice in the table itself I have a TH, which is row 1, and then 3 TDs, cell 1, 2, and 3, and a similar structure in the second row. And that displays this way. Or if we add in the border collapse for the table element, the result looks like this. In both of these cases, notice that the TH cells are boldface with no borders. This is because of browser default style properties. Border spacing style property. If a table has the style property border collapse separate specified, you can also explicitly define the space between adjacent borders with this property. It takes 1 or 2 length values. For example, border spacing 5 points, then the distance between horizontal borders and vertical borders will be 5 points, like this. But if border spacing 12 points, 0.2 inches, then horizontal spacing between borders will be 12 points, while the vertical spacing between borders will be 0.2 of an inch, like this. Note that a table may have a border as well as each cell. For our second example, let's build a table with images. Here we've been given the task of presenting a table of available meeting rooms. Eventually, this will be used for scheduling of meetings. We want 1 row for each space that could be used. We might start like this in the body. Here's a table, 7 rows, and each has only 1 TD cell, which is the name of the meeting space. And it might display this way. Well, not very exciting, but it's a start. Next, let's add a second column consisting of a picture of the space for those spaces that have pictures available, and the letters N/A for the others. So now our table has a new cell for each row, so a new column, and they are image elements instead of text, except a couple of them have just the NA. And now we have a little more interesting page, because now you can see the picture of the space, so it might make a decision when you're scheduling. Still, it might be nice if the cells had a consistent size, and we can do this by assigning widths and heights to cells in the second column, so let's give it a try. First, let's find out the dimensions of all the images. Recall that if you right-click your cursor when over an image, you get an option, View Image Info. Now, the wording might be a little different in different browsers. And you select, that is, left-click on that option, and you'll find the dimensions of the image. So we did that for the images on this page, and here's what we came up with. So if we set the width to 150 px and the height to 120 px, we'll be able to hold all of the images. So we try this style. .pic, width 150 pixels, height 120 pixels. And then we add class equal pic to each TD that holds an image. So now our code looks like this. And it results in this display. You can see the rows are all the same height by observing the text cells in the first column are evenly spaced vertically. For a third example, we'll do a more traditional table. Suppose we need to create a web page that describes the current status of our inventory, including a part number whose format is uppercase PART and 5 numeric digits, an item description, which is 25 characters or less, a unit price, which is of the format 99.99, that is 2 digits, decimal point 2 digits, quantity on hand, which is 3 digits, and quantity on order, which is 3 digits. Now, first thing, let's consider our style properties. I've chosen some arbitrary values to start, and we can modify as we go along as desired. Note that caption text is automatically centered. We'll assume the default position of top. We'll just set a font weight and size. So caption, font weight bold, font size 16 point. For part number, which will be in TD elements, color it red. So td.pno, we'll set that as a class and color red. For description, which will also be in TD elements, we'll color it blue. So td.desc, color blue. Note that unit price, quantity on hand, and quantity on order are all numeric values. So we can say td.num, font weight bold, font size 10 point, font family courier, text align right. Note that numeric values should generally use a fixed width font and be right aligned. Next, we display a part of a file for you to get the idea. The whole file is in your My Web Files directory under the name inventory0.html. So you see we have a table and our caption, and our first row, our TR, has 5 elements. First one, class equals pno, and it's part 03105. And the next one is class desk final flatulence. What are you going to do? The next one, the next 3 are class num, which remember is the unit price, quantity on hand, and quantity on order. So we repeat that, and there's several hundred items in the whole inventory. It displays this way. So we can take a look at the part numbers in red, the descriptions in blue, and the numeric fields are on the right there all in black. Looks like the columns would be more readable if there was a little more room between them. Well, I did some trial and error, and I got this. And in the style for td.pno, I added padding left, top, bottom, and right. And similarly for description and numeric fields. So when I did that, it looks this way, and you can see the columns are separated a little bit, but they still are kind of run together. I guess I'll try some borders. So now I'm going to add a border, solid red 1 pixel for part number, and solid blue 1 pixel for description, and solid black 1 pixel for the numeric type data. And it looks this way. Too busy, too cluttered. Now recall, there are 2 style models for tables. The collapsing border model, where you specify border collapse, collapse, and the separated borders model, where you specify border collapse separate, or just allow this to default. These models function the same except for how they handle certain border properties. And in particular, the collapsing border model allows me to specify the properties of each edge of a border. So I added table border collapse, collapse, and then specified the edges of the borders this way. For all 3 style classes, I made border left and border top both be none to give it sort of an open feel. And then border right and border bottom were solid 1 pixel borders with the color red or blue or black, depending upon which element you're looking at. And now we see this. Oh, well, that's an improvement, I think. But now, wouldn't it be nice if each column had a descriptive header? Well, we can add that with some TH elements. So now I'm going to set a style for TH. I want it to be color red, border double black 3 pixels, and padding right 2 pixels. Again, this was done with some trial and error. And in the table, I add a row at the front, which is a collection of TH elements. So there will be a header for each column. So part number, description, unit price, quantity on hand, and quantity on order. Now it displays this way. Okay. But there's two things I notice I don't like. The rightmost two columns are too wide, and this is because the browser makes each column as wide as the widest data in all the cells in that column. I can fix this by adding a BR element after the word quantity in both cases. And the caption is really too close to the table, and I fix this by adding some padding at the bottom. So for the caption, it now reads font weight bold, font size 16 point, and padding bottom 8 pixels. And now, going to the table itself, you'll see after the quantity, word quantity, I added a BR element. And then this displays this way. So we have our column headers, and over on the right, quantity on hand and quantity on order. Break it up that way. So I'm happy with this. Of course, you might make changes, and we'll be basing some future discussions using this as a starting point. For our fourth and final example of using tables, we're going to create graphs using tables. Now the idea here is to create a bar containing a color band for each component of the graph. We have supplied 1 pixel images, each of a different color. And when specifying the content of a cell, you specify the name of the image and supply height and width numbers. The browser will repeat the pixel image to fill the specified height and width. It turns out, and I just noticed this today, mid-April of 2020, that if your 1 pixel color image is type GIF, the ends shade into black, while if the 1 pixel color image is of type PNG, the image is simply a solid block of that color. So this developed into an interesting choice for me. I originally used the GIF versions and got this. So here's our meal expenses for days 1, 2, and 3, and our color key. The yellow means breakfast, the blue means lunch, and the red represents dinner. Whereas if I use the PNG elements, the results look like this. Notice there's no particular borders between the elements in a row or around the color key. So the gradation effect of the GIF images create those natural dividers between the values in the graph and borders around the color key elements. Can we modify the PNG version to provide those features? Well, I tried putting a border around each of the images. Here's the style part, and I've got my style with a caption and a class of block, and its border solid black 2 pixels. Now here's the main table code. We begin with our table start tag, and then we have a caption, meal expenses. Then our first row, TR, begins with a header, TH, day 1, and some dots and a non-breaking space. And then our data cell, our main element here, contains 3 image elements, and the source is yellow.png, blue.png, and red.png, and the width is different in each one, 50, 60, and 100 here, but the height is the same, 50 pixels in all cases. The alt values are set up for people who are visually impaired or who have their images turned off in their browser, so it conveys the color and the width value so the user can understand what the value is on the graph. And then they're all class equals block. The second day, similar structure, second row, day 2 for the header, and the same structure for the elements, the image elements. The only thing that's different is the values there, 60, 80, and 120. So that's our lunch values. And then for day 3, same idea. The thing that's different again is the width values, and then there's our end of table. Now here's the code for the color key terminal. Table, caption, color key, and a row, a header for breakfast, and then a data cell, image source yellow, and PNG, width equals 50, height equals 50, and alt yellow. And similarly for lunch and dinner. Here's our result. Not bad, but I don't like the spaces between the images on the top table. It took me a while to figure out It's because there's white space between the image elements and the HTML. If I can place these elements adjacent with no space between them, it might solve the problem. So I tried this approach. So in a data cell, image source equals yellow.png, width equals 50, height equals 50, alt equals yellow 50 class block. Now here's the end of the first image immediately followed by the start of the second image. See, I can break the image element attributes across lines as long as the end of one image element is immediately followed by the start of the next image element. And similarly for day 2 and day 3. So the end of an image element is immediately adjacent to the start of the next image element, and it gives me this. Well, I actually prefer this to the original approach I had. You may feel differently, but at least you see your options. A note on the 1-pixel color images. I initially supplied a dozen of the GIF format colors in the My Web Files directory, and I don't recall where or when I first got them. Today, I found a site that allows me to create the PNG format images. http://www.1x1px.me/#. And I used this site to download the PNG version of the GIF colors already supplied. Now, it helped to have the CSS colors standard as a reference for the names of the colors and the hex values that go into the components. And here's the site for the CSS colors standard. In this lesson, we've begun our exploration of HTML tables. The essential elements: table, caption, tr, th, and td; style properties unique to tables; border collapse, one of collapse or separate or inherit for table elements; and border spacing, 1 or 2 length fields for tables with border collapse of separate; and caption side, top, bottom, or inherit for caption elements. Several approaches for building tables, and the importance of style, especially border properties, in displaying tabular data. Coming up, further exploration of tables, structuring cells that span columns and/or rows, grouping columns and rows, table headers and table footers, and table body elements. See you there.